Hello everyone and welcome. In earlier session we talk about some of the water governance practices in the ancient India. In this particular session we will see how the water is governed mostly in the post independence period. We will talk briefly about pre-independence era as well, the British period, but mostly we will discuss what are the governance practices in the post independence period. To begin with, in pre-British India, management of water was a local matter and was in the hands of community. Many rulers started taking interest in the water supply project, and slowly gradually it moved from the hands of the community to the state, and eventually the control came in the hands of bureaucrats and engineers. Traditional methods of water management steadily went out of fashion, and the modern engineered structure started coming in more frequently. The North India Canal and Drainage Act, which was passed in 1873, that entitled the state local government for taking control of the water for public purposes. The riparian rights also came under the Indian Easement Acts in 1982. Further, in that period, during that pre-independence period in the British era, various irrigation, canal and drainage acts were passed at different stages. The Central Water Commission, that is still there and working, was also established in 1945, couple of years before the independence. The responsibility of the Central Water Commission given was to basically conduct awareness program for control, conservation and utilization of the resources. Then this colonial legislation also introduced the division of responsibilities between center and different regions and state in respect to the water. There was a Government of India Act which was passed in 1935. It empowered the provinces or states, that time states were used to be called provinces. So, it empowered provinces to take the decision on water supply, irrigation, canal, drainage, all such sort of projects related to the water. Whenever there was a conflict between provinces or states, it was subjected to the jurisdiction of the Governor General, who could appoint a commission to investigate the case. In the independent India, when we sort of got independent, got free in 1947, still we largely relied on to the water governance practices and water governance rules from the pre-independence era. So, from the colonial period, whatsoever rule was existing at the colonial period, we borrowed largely from there, and in our own Indian constitution we also had water as a subject of 3 different levels. So, there were center bodies mainly looking after the interstate rivers and the disputes, interstate water disputes primarily. Then there were state bodies which were mainly responsible for making water management regulations. So, state bodies are to make policy, rules and regulations for water governance within the state. So, the allocation policies, how much water should go to the agriculture sector, how much water should go to the drinking water sector, who owns the right of this. So, all that policy decisions are actually in the hands of state bodies. Then we have local bodies which are there for implementation of the water management scheme. So, whatsoever policies or practices states develops, it has to be implemented by the local bodies. Local bodies as in municipalities, Panchayati Raj institutions. So, all those smaller section or the various government departments at the district level, city level. So, they are the one who are responsible for implementing these programs. If we look at the constitutional provision, so in our constitution under article 246 we have 3 types of list in the 7th schedule. There is one list 1 which is union list, then there is a list 2 which is state list, and then there is a list 3 which is concurrent list. So, union list, whatsoever item or whatsoever entries are there in union list, it is basically under the purview of the central government. So, it is union government or central government holds right onto the items mentioned in the list 1 or union list. So, in relation to the water, if you see, the union list says that regulation or and development of interstate rivers and river valleys to the extent with such regulation and development under the control of union. So, basically this is the entry 56, and water for interstate rivers is in the jurisdiction of the central government. The fishing and fisheries beyond terrestrial water, which is listed as entry 57 in the union list, is also under the purview of the central government. Then there are some small points related to the shipping and navigation on the inland waterways, and then shipping and navigation in maritime, including in the tidal waters, which is in the entry 25, and carriage of passenger and goods by railway, sea or air or by national waterways in mechanically propelled vehicles is also listed as entry 30 in the union list. So, these rights or these powers are there with the central government. With state government, in the list 2 of the 7th schedule of article 246, it says that entry 17 is the most important one, most important entry there, which says that water, that is to say water supplies, irrigation and canal, drainage and embankment, storage and water power are all subject to the jurisdiction of state government, okay, subject to the provision of entry 56 list 1. So, whatever was the listed in the jurisdiction of the central government as a list 1, the union list, excluding that all other items, all other important items related to water, including supply, irrigation, canal, drainage, embankment, water storage, water power things, are all actually under the purview of the state as mentioned in the entry 17 in the list 2 of the 7th schedule. Taxes on goods and passenger carried by road or inland waterways are also under the state mentioned in the list 2, and communication with road, bridges, ferries and other mean communication not specified in list 1. So, basically for smaller such communication, because list 1 takes for the transboundary or the larger national rivers. So, all other are actually under the purview of the state. Then there is a list 3 which is concurrent list, on which we this center as well as state both have powers, is shipping and navigation on inland waterways as regarded mechanically propelled vehicle, and the rule of road on such waterways and carries of the passenger and goods on inland waterways are subject to the concurrent list. So, there are rights of both union government or central government as well as state government. Apart from that, under article 262, the union is also entitled to legislate on the adjudication of the interstate water dispute. So, that is one of the prime responsibility of the central government to adjudicate the interstate water disputes. For this, Interstate Water Dispute Act was made, and in 1956, which authorized government to create specific tribunals addressing interstate water disputes, and this is the act which has been used in solving so many interstate water disputes, including the Kaveri, Krishna Godavari, Narmada river. So, all that interstate water disputes, lot of interstate water disputes has been solved using these tribunals constructed under this act. The Parliament also enacted a River Boards Act to allow the central government to establish river boards to advise state government on the regulation and development of interstate river or river valley. So, the government was sort of supposed to frame a river boards for all such interstate river, at least major river basins. Okay. The idea of the river boards were that it can advise on conservation, control and optimum utilization of the resources for different purpose, obviously including irrigation, water supply, drainage or the promotion and operation of the schemes for flood control. However, this act was never came in the full flow in full practice. There are quite a few of other related provisions and acts onto the water. So, in under article 243 ZD there is a committee for district planning. So, on a district level the local district administration has the authority for managing the activities in the district and water is also included in that. Similarly, committee for metropolitan planning, which is under 243 article ZE. So, that is under the jurisdiction of the metropolitan agency looking after that. Then there is under article 244 2 6th schedule, there are entries regarding the administration of the tribal areas in the state of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram, the northeastern states, and water is also mentioned in that, how the jurisdiction of water should be divided and the responsibility should be distributed among the administrators. Then there is article 288, which says the exemption of taxation by the state in respects of water or electricity. So, it is law related to that. Then there is article 297, which says that things of value within terrestrial waters or continental shelves and resources of the exclusive economic zone belongs to this union. So, basically all the minerals and these kind of resources, subsurface resources are in fact a property of the central government. There are quite a few other acts and regulations were passed. There was the Betwa River Board Act in 1956, Brahmaputra Board Act that came in 1980, the Water Preservation Control and Pollution Act related to the environmental maintenance of the water resources came in 1974, then Inland Waterways Authority of India Act came in 1985, the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So, that way we had several of the such provisions and acts coming into the picture from time to time. There are some are listed here, of course, there are quite a few more. Now, there were a few review committees and commissions constituted on from time to time on looking after this responsibility sharing or the water making a state subject, largely at least water making largely as a state subject. So, in order to review this, there were several commissions looked the case from time to time. One of the popular one was Sarkaria Commission, which gave its report in 1988. So, it says that this is probably the best possible method of distributing power between union and state, and the commission does not support the suggestion of water should be made a union subject. So, commission was more or less okay with that. Water, the major water powers are listed under the list 2 of the state jurisdiction. There were a Punchi Commission which again coined similar opinion. Okay. It says that the good governance calls for decentralization and putting things on a state level or local level are one of the better ways to decentralize the management. So, nationalization is against the concept of decentralization, and that is why it is not recommended. So, that commission therefore said that we are not proposing any change in the scheme of the constitution. So, as it is listed like the water or the major water services should be in the hands of state, it is fine. However, they said that there is a need that union put in a place and center state consultative mechanism where in an effective way the center and state could agree on to the number of related issues on the water and could amicably come up with the policy which is acceptable to central government as well as state governments. In another such committee was by Ashok Chawla, who looked on the allocation of natural resources. So, this however sees rather like a contradictory, took a rather contradictory approach, and it said that there is a urgent need that a comprehensive national legislation on water should come. Okay. So, it said that the like it is in a way required that the water either can be bring to the concurrent list where state and central both have powers to exercise. So, central can have a say in the state policies as well, or there appropriate legislation is framed by obtaining consensus from the majority of the state, and such a framework law could be made where all the issues can be discussed on a larger scale. So, that was the idea of the Chawla committee. Now, if we look at the different water institutions in India, so we have at center we have Union Ministry of Water Resources, where there is a National Water Development Agency which is looking for the primarily river interlinking projects. Then we have Central Water Commission, mostly looking at the surface water management or river basin management activities, and there is a Central Groundwater Board CGWB which looks for the groundwater related issues. The major role of them is basically interstate water dispute resolution only. Then we have state level, so there are public health engineering department PHEDs at state level, irrigation department, water supply and sanitation board. So, those kind of state level institutions are there acting into the water sector, and at local bodies, so municipalities, or if we go further down the level, so in a village panchayats or panchayati raj institutions are there for implementation purpose of the scheme. So, this is how the water responsibilities are shared in the nation. Now, if we see, there has been a evolution of water policy and program, of course, and some of the major ones are listed here. We had accelerated rural water supply program of 0.25 billion in 72, then National Water Perspective Plan came in 1980. So, quite a few programs, the more popular one like Swajal Dhara, which was around 10.7 billion rupees program that came in 2003. We had like Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewable Mission, that project in 2005, Bharat Nirman project in 2005, National Water Project for Repair, Renovation and Restoration of Water Bodies of 100 billion. So, that also launched in 2005. Around 2009 or 2010, the National Water Mission, which was under the climate change, this thing was also came, and we had evolution even thereafter, but not listed in that figure. So, National Water Mission, which is one of the important step taken by the government of India. A National Water Mission was established by the Ministry of Water Resources as one of the 8 national missions under National Action Plan on Climate Change. So, when India accepted that and came up with a National Action Plan on Climate Change, so National Water Mission is one of the 8 components of that. The main objective of this mission was to conservation of water, minimizing wastage and ensuring its more equitable distribution both across and within the states, and sort of coming with an integrated water resource development and management program. So, this National Water Mission identified 5 distinguished goals, of which there were comprehensive water database creation and putting that in the public domain. then promotion of citizen and state actions for water conservation, augmentation and preservation. There was focused attention on the vulnerable areas where the over exploitation of water was taking place. One of the major targets was increasing water use efficiency by 20%, and then there was promotion of basin level integrated water resource management. So, these were sort of the 5 major goals identified. Now, for each of these 5 goals action agenda was also developed. Okay. Most of them was related to the policy improvement. So, and some budget allocation or requirement of funds and budget, or bringing in stakeholders together, and these were a timeline based plans. So, like one of the idea was to revise national water policy. So, this national water policy was revised in again the latest revision came in the 2012. Then there was idea of like putting expenditure in certain sectors by 11, 13. Even there was discussion about the completing the river interlinking project or making significant progress in the river interlinking project. So, their way the variety of action agendas, variety of items under action agendas were set. However, it could not meet all those points or all those targets, but still some improvement were made. So, this mission is actually available on the Ministry of Water Resources website. There are 2 volumes of this. So, the volume 1 is there and volume 2 is there. Now, these 2 volumes, whosoever is interested can actually go and refer, the links are also provided, can download and read it them. The important thrust activities outlined in the mission was promoting research and studies, then expediting the implementation of the projects related to the water resources, particularly those who are acting onto the climate change also, because this, if you recall, this national water mission was planned as one of the missions under that climate change program. Then there was a promotion of traditional system of water conservation, that was also one of the important areas that was highlighted. Then intensive program for groundwater recharge in the over exploited areas. So, under over exploited area, how this groundwater recharge can be ensured in order to replenish the water table, incentivizing the recycling and reuse of water and especially the wastewater. Then there was sort of emphasis on the capacity building and awareness program for involving different stakeholders, sensitization of the elected representatives or politicians. So, the one of the important this thing was given, because the politician may not have that exact background. So, they also should be sensitized and made aware with the local issues in their own area, so that they can think over and if possible take some steps onto that. And then orient investments under MNREGA towards the water conservation. So, that this MNREGA scheme, which is for the providing job security or at least 100 days of work to the local or village level or those sort of people. So, under that it was brought that those investments or those projects should target towards the water conservation. So, this was the main thrust activities outlined in the National Water Mission. The further details are available in the documents. The national water policies are also one of the important milestone in the water governance structure in India. So, national water policies have been drafted by the Ministry of Water Resources with the aim to formulate the policies for governing and planning, governing the planning and development of water resources and their optimum utilization. So, that was the broad idea. The first policy was drafted by working group of union ministers and chief ministers in 1987. So, in fact, it was constituted in 1985. So, from 85 to 87, around for couple of years there were several round of discussions onto that, and then in the finally in 1987 the first draft or first document was prepared. Further, it was revised in 2002 in the 5th meeting of this working group of expertise, and the latest revision took place in 2012, which was after the National Water Mission came, and it said that the national water policy need to be revised. So, obviously, the subsequent policies, that means the policy in the 2002 and 2012 attempted to improve the previous policy to meet the whatever the current or contemporary challenges there, and to apply the modern tools and technologies for the management of the water resources. If you look at the key features of the national water policy, so the major idea was to basically emphasize the integrated water resource management and restructure the water institutions in a way so that the multidisciplinary approach could be adopted for water resources management, because for integrated water resource management we have to have interdisciplinary approach, and our water institutions are not structured that way that they have the people from different expertise or that interdisciplinary skills are there. So, it was one of the idea proposed in the national water policy to restructure these institutions. There was idea over like equity and social justice, ensuring these things, then making a national framework law as an umbrella statement, so that there has to be a in the national water policy it was believed that there has to be a national framework law, like a big law under which a kind of umbrella statement under which the different state or different other organizations can have their own legislations, okay, and under that the powers could be distributed between center, state and local governing bodies. So, that was one of the key features. Then utilization of water should be optimized in domestic agriculture, hydropower, thermal power. So, in all different sectors the utilization of water should be optimized. That was one of the propositions of the national water policy, and there was further like stress that the highest priority allocation should be for drinking water and sanitation. After that the basic human needs, then irrigation and sort of ecological needs, industrial needs, all that can be taken care of, but highest priority has to be allocation of drinking water and sanitation. The governance institutions must ensure that access to the minimum quantity of the safe potable water should reach to the every individual. Further, the water saving in irrigation should be encouraged, means one can promote different technologies for that, including the micro irrigation like drip or sprinkle irrigation methods, minimizing evapotranspiration losses or automizing the irrigation operations. So, all those things should be there, and canal seepage water should be recycled through conjunctive groundwater use purpose. The water available for use should be enhanced. Now, how water available for use could be enhanced? So, they gave an idea that we should use direct rainfall, some of the desalinated sea water should be used, and we should do whatever it takes to avoid the evapotranspiration losses, because there is a significant evapotranspiration losses that takes water away to the atmosphere, fresh water away to the atmosphere. So, that was some steps suggested for making for having more water available for the uses purpose. Further, the community should be sensitized and encouraged to adopt the utilization of water as per local availability, okay, and then thereafter the transfers should be considered. The interbasin transfers of the water for increasing production or meeting basic human needs should basically be considered basis on the merit of each case. So, it has to be basically evaluated on case to case basis, looking for environmental, economic and social impact of such transfer. There was suggestions over pricing water. So, it said that the water should be fairly priced and the tariff that are arrived through independent statutory water regulatory authority. So, the policy suggested that we should have a independent water regulatory authority. We discussed in earlier lecture the advantage of having an independent regulator. The policy also suggested that we should have a independent statutory water regulatory authority, which should basically fix up the tariff by looking at the conditions of the states and by consultation with all the stakeholders. Further, for drinking water and sanitation purpose, food security and supporting basic livelihood, the water can be priced based on the principle of differential pricing. So, principle of differential pricing essentially means we could have different prices for different person. So, the one like income based pricing or concept of subsidies and all that come into the principle of differential pricing. However, after that the water allocation and its pricing should be based on solely economic principle, so that the water could be appropriately priced and its unnecessary usage and wastages could be reduced. There was a permanent water dispute tribunal at center was suggested, that center should have a permanent water dispute tribunal in order to look for such disputes. Then there was a appropriate institutional arrangement required to collect all the data on regular basis for every river basin, and then there is an appropriate mechanism to audit that data and put that data in a public domain. The suggestion was that it should be put on a public domain on 10 daily basis every year, means at every 10 day how is the variation, that sort of information should be put in. The water budgeting and accounting should be carried out for aquifers also, for groundwaters also. So, this was the idea. Further, all the data should basically be in the public domain other than the one which are classified on national security consideration. So, those things can be kept reserved with the government entities, but rest other should be in the public domain, and a national water informatics center was proposed, was suggested to basically collect, collate and process the hydrological data regularly and put that in a public domain in a usable format, in an open and transparent manner, like in a GIS platform. Then there were few more points on international agreements with neighboring countries on a bilateral basis should be emphasized. Sharing and management of the data on international data and water on international rivers should be planned out by the bilateral treaties and bilateral agreements. Further research and technological advancement should be promoted. So, quite a few obvious things, and then said also recommended that there should be an autonomous center for research in water policy should be set up so that it can evaluate the implications of the various policy decisions. So, in line to the national water policy, various state also had their own water policies, like we have Rajasthan state water policy, UP, Karnataka, Maharashtra, almost majority of the state has, and these state water policies borrow most of the things from national water policy except few small changes, like in Maharashtra we have second priority given to the industrial water early after drinking water. However, this stands changed and second priority has now come to the irrigation. In Odisha, second priority is given to the environmental sector after drinking water. So, there are few small changes here and there. However, the state water policies largely adopts the principle and the suggestions put into the national water policy. So, this was the sort of major governance structure on a government level in India which is adopted post independence. and we will end this session here, and next session we will discuss some specific program and policies related to the specific sector like for drinking water. Thank you.